There is a date circled on calendars inside Google, inside the Pentagon, inside the world's largest banks, and almost nobody outside those rooms has ever heard of it. They call it Q Day. 6 weeks ago, that date moved. Not by accident, not by guesswork. An artificial intelligence helped a small group of scientists discover something that quietly rewired the timeline for when every password, every bank account, every encrypted government secret on Earth could be cracked open. The official estimate used to be 2035. Read that again. It isn't 2035 anymore. For years, the people who actually understood quantum computing kept telling the rest of us the same comforting lie. Relax, it's decades away. Encryption is safe. The machines that could break it exist only in theory, in laboratories, in PowerPoint slides shown at conferences nobody outside the industry ever watches. That story was repeated so often it became background noise, the kind of warning you stop hearing after the 10th time. But according to multiple quantum computing experts who spoke to journalists in the days after, that comforting story collapsed in a single week this past March. And it didn't collapse because of a new supercomputer, or a government program, or a billion-dollar chip. It collapsed because of artificial intelligence quietly doing something nobody had given it permission to imagine. Here is what most people are not seeing. On the same week in late March 2026, two separate teams, one inside Google's quantum AI division, the other at a brand new startup called Oratomic, born out of Caltech, independently published research that did something almost nobody in the field thought was coming this soon. They didn't build a bigger quantum computer. They didn't discover new material. What they did was far more dangerous because what they discovered was a shortcut. A way to break the encryption protecting the modern internet using a fraction, a tiny, almost embarrassing fraction, of the machinery experts had spent a decade insisting would be necessary. And buried inside both breakthroughs, almost as a footnote, was a confession that should have been the headline. Artificial intelligence had been instrumental in getting them there. One of the lead researchers put it more bluntly than any press release ever does. There is no question, he said, that AI was used to accelerate this. No question at all. Think about what that actually means for a second, because it is easy to read past it. This isn't a story about quantum computers getting stronger. Quantum computers have been getting stronger, slowly, for 20 years, and the public stopped caring because progress always seemed to crawl. This is a story about the rate of progress itself changing shape. An AI system, built originally to do something else entirely, was turned loose on the unglamorous, grinding mathematics of error correction. The single biggest bottleneck that had kept quantum computers too fragile, too noisy, too far from being dangerous. And in a matter of months, it found efficiencies that human researchers, working the traditional way, might have taken years to stumble onto, if they ever stumbled onto them at all. The machine didn't just help. It compressed time. And once you understand that quantum capability and time are the only two variables that matter in this story, you start to understand why people inside the industry are using words like shock instead of words like progress. Let's slow down here, because the numbers themselves are the part nobody wants to say out loud in plain language. Before this breakthrough, the standard estimate for the kind of encryption-protecting cryptocurrency wallets, the elliptic curve cryptography baked into Bitcoin, Ethereum, and most of the secure communication on the internet, was that you'd need a machine with roughly 10 million physical qubits to crack it. 10 million. A number so large it functioned as a kind of psychological safety blanket. Nobody had to panic about something that far away. Google's new research dropped that number by a factor of 20. Suddenly, the estimate wasn't 10 million. It was under 500,000. And here's where it gets worse. The Oratomic paper, using a completely different hardware approach built on individually trapped atoms instead of traditional superconducting circuits, pushed the number even lower, down to a figure researchers themselves described in their own words as shockingly low. 10,000 qubits. 10,000 to threaten the cryptography underneath a multi-trillion-dollar global financial layer that includes Bitcoin, Ethereum, and the broader machinery of online banking security. To put that in perspective, the laboratory record for trapping that exact kind of atom-based qubit, as of this year, sits at a little over 6,000. Read that again, slowly. The gap between what currently exists in a lab and what would be needed to threaten the financial backbone of the planet is no longer a gap measured in orders of magnitude. It is a gap you could close with an engineering sprint, not a scientific revolution. That is the sentence that made cybersecurity researchers describe what they read as a real shock. Not because the danger was new, everyone in the field had always known quantum computers would eventually be a threat, but because the runway between today and that threat had just been slashed, violently, almost overnight, and an algorithm helped slash it. But encryption-protecting cryptocurrency was never the real prize. It was simply the easiest math problem to solve first, the soft target, the canary. The harder target, the one that actually keeps national security officials awake, is RSA 2048, the encryption standard still quietly running underneath enterprise email, digital signatures, government communications, and huge swaths of legacy infrastructure that nobody has gotten around to replacing. For years, breaking that standard was estimated to require around 20 million physical qubits, a number so astronomical it was treated almost as a permanent ceiling, an assurance that whatever happened with smaller, weaker encryption systems, the truly critical infrastructure was safe for decades. The new research dropped that estimate too, not to zero, not to anything achievable tomorrow, but down to roughly 100,000 qubits, a reduction of nearly 200 times in the space of a single publication cycle. This is not chaos. This is a trajectory. And trajectories, once they start bending this fast, do not bend back. Here is where the story stops being a technology story and starts becoming a story about power, because the moment those numbers were published, the people running the institutions that depend on encryption did something telling. They didn't wait for peer review. They didn't wait for confirmation. They moved. Cloudflare, the company quietly securing a significant fraction of all traffic on the internet, the invisible plumbing behind a staggering number of websites you use every day, announced within days that it was accelerating its own internal deadline for full quantum safe security. The old target had been comfortably distant. The new target, 2029. Google did the same thing on the same week for its own infrastructure, including the security model running underneath Android, the operating system on most of the smartphones on Earth. When two of the most technically sophisticated organizations in the world both independently decide, in the same 7-day window, that their safety margin just evaporated, that is not an overreaction. That is an organization reading a number and understanding exactly what it means. And this is where everything changes, because the danger here was never only about the future. It is about the past, sitting quietly, waiting. There's a specific kind of attack that cybersecurity professionals have a name for. Store now, decrypt later. It works like this. An adversary, hostile government, an intelligence service, a patient and well-funded actor, doesn't need a working quantum computer today to start winning tomorrow. All they need to do is intercept and store encrypted traffic right now, today, while you and I assume it's perfectly safe and simply wait. Wait for the machine that can unlock it to finally exist. Every secure message, every financial transaction, every diplomatic cable, every piece of classified data that has ever traveled across the internet and been intercepted along the way, all of it may already be sitting in some server farm somewhere, encrypted, useless for now, ticking. The compressed timeline doesn't just threaten future secrets. According to officials who study this exact threat, it retroactively threatens secrets that were supposedly protected years ago. The clock on those secrets was already running. Nobody told you it had been running this whole time. Stop and consider who has the patience and the resources to play a waiting game measured in years. This is not the profile of a lone hacker or a criminal ransomware operation looking for a quick payout. This is the profile of a nation-state. According to people inside the cybersecurity world, the assumption inside intelligence circles has long been that the most capable governments on Earth have already been running exactly this kind of harvesting operation for years, quietly siphoning encrypted data with no urgency to crack it, confident that time itself was the missing ingredient. What that compressed timeline just did was hand those same actors a far shorter countdown to when that harvested data becomes readable. And here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. The breakthroughs that triggered all of this were published openly in public research papers, available to anyone with an internet connection. Which means whatever advantage Google and Oratomic just handed the defenders, they handed an identical advantage to everyone else reading the same paper, including the governments, least interested in playing by anyone else's rules. What most people are not seeing is the deeper irony buried inside this entire story, the one that turns it from a security headline into something closer to a parable. Artificial intelligence helped accelerate a quantum breakthrough that now threatens to undermine the encryption protecting, among everything else, artificial intelligence systems themselves. The model weights, the training data, the proprietary research worth hundreds of billions of dollars locked inside the data centers of the very companies racing to build smarter AI. The tool and the threat are no longer separate categories. They are feeding each other. AI accelerates quantum. Quantum threatens the digital locks protecting AI. And the institutions pouring the most money into AI research are simultaneously the institutions with the most to lose if that same technology helps someone else pick the lock first. This is not coincidence. This is the shape every transformative technology eventually takes once it becomes powerful enough to point at itself. According to informed voices inside the research community, there is genuine disagreement about how seriously to take any of this, and that disagreement is itself part of the tension because uncertainty at this scale is its own kind of danger. The papers have not yet passed peer review. Independent academics studying the field have publicly noted that several of the underlying assumptions remain untested, that laboratory conditions are not the same as adversarial reality, that plausible is not the same word as certain. A respected quantum researcher who has spent his career building toward fault-tolerant systems put it carefully. A working, large-scale machine by the end of this decade is plausible, he said. Not guaranteed. That single word, plausible, is doing enormous work in that sentence. It is the difference between a 5-alarm fire and a smoke detector that might be malfunctioning. But here's where it gets worse. Even the skeptics inside this field are not arguing that the threat isn't real. They are only arguing about exactly how many years remain. Nobody serious is arguing for 0. And the institutions that actually have to make decisions under uncertainty cannot afford to wait for that disagreement to resolve itself. The United States' own standards body had set 2035 as the deadline for transitioning critical systems to quantum-resistant encryption, a date chosen with what felt, until recently, like a comfortable margin built in. That margin is the thing that just disappeared. Financial institutions are already being warned, through emerging regulatory frameworks, that the cost of migrating proactively is measured in the millions, while the cost of an emergency migration after a real quantum event hits is measured in orders of magnitude more, the kind of cost that doesn't just damage a balance sheet, it can damage public trust in an institution permanently. One modeled scenario circulating among financial security analysts estimated that a single successful quantum attack against just one major bank's infrastructure could trigger losses and remediation costs that dwarf almost any other category of cyber incident on record. Read that again. We are no longer talking about a future inconvenience. We are talking about a line item that boards of directors are now being told, explicitly, to plan around. Here's the part of the story that turns this from a technology briefing into something closer to a geopolitical fault line. Whoever builds a working, fault-tolerant quantum computer first does not simply gain a faster calculator, they gain something closer to a master key, a tool capable of unlocking the encrypted communications, financial systems, and stored secrets of every rival who has not yet adapted. In any other era, a capability like that would be treated the way nuclear weapons were treated in the 1940s, as a strategic asset so dangerous that its very existence reshapes the balance of power between nations, regardless of whether it is ever actually used. According to analysts who track this space, governments around the world have already begun signaling exactly that level of seriousness, framing fault-tolerant quantum computing as a matter of technological sovereignty, pouring procurement budgets into national labs, and treating the race itself, not just the destination, as a strategic priority. The country that crosses this finish line first inherits a temporary devastating advantage over every adversary who assumed they had a decade to prepare. But here's where the story refuses to resolve into something simple, because the people closest to it cannot agree on whether to be terrified or merely vigilant. The same researchers warning that the world is not prepared are also the researchers who chose deliberately to publish their findings openly rather than bury them. They made a calculated bet that public transparency, giving defenders the same head start they were giving potential attackers, would do more good than silence. Whether that bet pays off depends entirely on what happens next. And on actors, none of these researchers control. Because the uncomfortable truth sitting underneath all of this is that the published research represents only what we know. According to the same Cloudflare researcher who described the breakthrough as a genuine shock, there is, in his words, ample reason to expect that the most significant future progress in this race will stop being published publicly at all. Think about what that means. The next breakthrough, the one that actually crosses the finish line, may not arrive with a press release. It may simply arrive. So where does that leave the rest of us? The people who don't run a cybersecurity team, who don't sit on a national security council, who just use a phone, a bank account, an email address like everyone else on Earth? It leaves us in a strange, suspended moment that doesn't happen often in technological history. A moment where the experts themselves are telling us plainly that they don't know exactly how much time is left, only that it is less than they thought a few months ago. Some of the world's largest internet infrastructure companies have already moved their internal deadlines forward by years. Some of the smartest researchers in the field are using words like shock without a hint of exaggeration. And the very tool accelerating this entire transition, artificial intelligence, is simultaneously the thing everyone is racing to protect, and the thing that just helps shrink the runway protecting it. What happens between now and whatever year Q-Day actually arrives is, by definition, the part of the story nobody can write yet. Maybe the skeptics are right, and the engineering hurdles between 10,000 laboratory qubits and a stable, weaponizable quantum computer prove far harder to clear than today's optimistic estimates suggest, buying the world the extra years it is counting on. Maybe the next breakthrough really does happen in silence, inside a government lab or private company with no incentive to publish, and the rest of us only find out it happened when something we assumed was unbreakable suddenly isn't. Maybe the post-quantum migration currently underway at companies like Google and Cloudflare succeeds in time, and this entire chapter becomes a story we tell about a crisis the world saw coming and managed to prevent. Or maybe the harvested data, already sitting in foreign servers, collected years ago under the old assumption that it was permanently safe, is closer to being readable than anyone outside a handful of classified briefings currently understands. What we do know is this. The machines that protect the digital world were built on the assumption that certain math problems were too hard for any computer to solve in a human lifetime. That assumption held for decades. It just got a visible crack in it in public in a matter of weeks, not because of a bigger machine, but because an artificial intelligence found a shortcut nobody had thought to look for. And once you understand that the thing doing the discovering is a system that improves every single year, faster than the encryption protecting us was ever designed to withstand, the only honest question left isn't whether Q-Day is coming. It's whether anyone will see it coming when it finally does.